Good morning. My name is Edmund Russo. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers, Galveston District. This is a report on the status of Addicks and Barker Reservoir dams. This summary follows our latest media report, which was made at 7:30 p.m. last night on August the 28th. At this time, the pool elevation at Addicks is approximately at 108 feet, which is up from 105 feet at 5 p.m. yesterday. The pool elevation as of 10 p.m. yesterday at Barker is at about 100 feet, which is up from 99.2 feet at 5 p.m. yesterday. Both of these pools extend beyond government-owned reservoir land. These are both record highs above the April 2016 pool levels reached. Home flooding is ongoing upstream at both reservoirs. This occurs at 103.4 feet at Addicks and at 97.1 at Barker. To date, approximately 34 inches of rain has fallen in the watersheds upstream of Addicks and Barker. This is approximately half of the average rainfall amount expected in the Houston area over the course of a year. Estimates from the National Weather Service on rainfall above Addicks and Barker from today through the remainder of this tropical event is about 9 inches. This estimate is down from the previous estimate from August 27th of 25 inches. The Corps of Engineers started water releases from both Addicks and Barker yesterday. The intent is to maintain the ability to control releases to the extent possible before uncontrolled releases would begin. Additionally, controlled releases reduce the magnitude and duration of uncontrolled releases, potentially decreasing the impacts of flooding. In the current event conditions, there is an expectation for uncontrolled releases at the Addicks spillway this morning. Spillway flows at Addicks just begin at the low natural ground at the end of the spillway when the pool elevation reaches 108 feet. That elevation for Barker is 104 feet. At the rates of rise in Barker, it is becoming likely that Barker Spillway will go into operations. At 2 p.m. yesterday, we estimated that Addicks was discharging at about 2,600 cubic feet per second, or CFS, and Barker about 2,100 CFS, for a combined total flow of 4,700 CFS. We continue to raise the gates slowly at the structures in a controlled incremental fashion. As of 5 p.m. yesterday, these discharge rates were approximately 3,800 CFS and 3,500 CFS respectively, for a combined total discharge of 7,300 CFS. The goal is to reach rates of 4,000 CFS at both Addicks and Barker for a combined discharge down Buffalo Bayou of 8,000 CFS. We estimate the dams will approach this target combined discharge rate today. No decisions have been made to increase planned discharge rates above this amount. Dam releases are expected to occur for several months following this storm event. Releases from Addicks and Barker constitute about 20% of the total flow of Buffalo Bayou, with the remaining 80% attributable to watershed runoff below the dams into the Bayou network. With rainfall still occurring in downstream reaches of Buffalo Bayou and tributaries, as well as with discharge from water from Addicks and Barker, the elevation of the bayou is holding fairly steady and may take several days to recede. The Corps of Engineers is rerunning models with the revised rain forecast to estimate the extent and timing of flooding below and above Addicks and Barker beyond the extreme rain event flooding that has already occurred. We are also performing the modeling to better understand the patterns of uncontrolled discharge around the northern end of Addicks and both ends of Barker. The spillway flow at Addicks is starting today and expected to end approximately on the 20th of September, with a peak flow occurring on the 31st of August at 4,500 CFS. These flows are significant and could increase flooding potential downstream. The Addicks spillway overflows will migrate toward Buffalo Bayou along the Beltway 8 corridor and crossing I-10. The effect of the spread of the water is a mitigating consideration, however, as it enters streets, drainage networks, and with some flow potentially diverting into White Oak Bayou. For Barker, the spillway overflows are expected to occur starting on September 1st and end on September 4th. We expect peak flows occurring on September 2nd of approximately 100 CFS at the South Spillway and 200 CFS at the North Spillway. These flows will migrate through properties in the vicinity of the spillways and then enter Barker and Claudine ditches, which lead back into Buffalo Bayou. In general, for spillway overflows that occur, approximately 5% of Buffalo Bayou flow would be from the controlled release, 15% from the uncontrolled release, and about 80% from runoff in the watersheds below the dams. Properties upstream of Addicks and Barker are experiencing and expected to experience flooding starting from yesterday. A listing of neighborhoods near the dams that have potential to flood, given the understanding of current and future potential rainfall amounts, is listed at the website readyharris.org, or readyharris.org. Public safety is our #1 concern as we work closely with our partners, the City of Houston, Fort Bend County, Harris County, and the Texas Department of Public Safety as we monitor the dams and reservoirs. Residents adjacent to the reservoirs, both upstream of Addicks and Barker and downstream along Buffalo Bayou, need to be vigilant because the water in the reservoirs is rising rapidly and has significant potential to cause additional flooding impacts. That concludes my remarks. If there are any questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you have any idea what the combined uncontrolled and controlled flows mean in terms of level for Buffalo Bayou? How many feet are we talking about?
We're still modeling that. We don't have those results yet, but indications in discussions with Harris County and others is that as that water comes around the side of the dam, the spillway, it will have a distributing effect very broadly, entering streets and drainage networks, and some moving off into White Oak Bayou. So there may be a long residence time for it to actually finally make its way down there, so that could be a mitigating factor.
But it's fair to say that most of that water, whether it's moving through the streets or into the drainage systems of the suburbs surrounding the lake, is eventually going to end up back in Buffalo Bayou, correct?
Probably most of it. We're still modeling that to better understand what that effect will be.
So, yeah, last night you guys were saying that your model showed that in the worst case, that for the controlled releases from the dam, in the worst case, they could add anywhere between 6 inches to a foot to the current flooding levels at Buffalo Bayou, through the bayou. If that's 25% of the flow, does that mean potentially these uncontrolled flows could put another 3 feet in the bayou?
We don't have a real clear picture on that yet. We're still running models to better understand what the impacts with that would be. And we're going to continue to have updates for the media as we receive more results.
And I want to make sure I got this right. So you have 4,000 cubic feet of water coming out of Addicks at the moment as a controlled release, and you're expecting the uncontrolled releases to get up to 4,500 cubic feet of water?
Right, at its peak. So,
at its peak. So that would be in a couple of days, August the 31st, I think you were saying?
Yeah. So yeah, that would have some sort of a curve to it, and that would be a peak, and then it would start to drop off over time. But we'll have more results.
So yesterday and the day before, you guys were talking about how you wanted to get 8,000 cubic feet of water out of these dams in a controlled fashion, and to do it in a relatively quick amount of time in terms of sloping from no release up to 8,000 feet. It sounds like that your controlled releases still haven't hit that 8,000 benchmark yet. Why not?
Well, we're seeing it gradually get to that level. The biggest factor is the difference between the water level in the dam and the water level in Buffalo Bayou at the structure. So normally when the structures are discharging through the outlets, the water is flowing down the spillway of the structure into Buffalo Bayou. Right now the bayou is actually submerging the outlets, so that has an effect of not letting the water get out as quick.
Sure, and so I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Effectively what it sounds like you're saying is that Buffalo Bayou is so full at this point you can't get the amount of water you need to get out of the dams. And that's right. Contributing to the flooding of the spillway? spillways?
That's right.
Okay.
Do you expect any of the homes in the Buffalo Bayou area, especially inside the loop, the real dense, some of the dense built ups on either side, for those to be affected? I know that has not been affected so far, and a lot of those people, they're still there.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Jeff a little bit on that.
Okay. Let me give my portion of the update, and then we'll go back to that question. So since we are at the elevation now of overtopping of the north end spillway on Addicks, I want to make sure we have an understanding of the list of subdivisions that will be impacted or potentially impacted by this. Again, this is something we've never faced before, so we are trying our best to wrap our hands around what exactly this water is going to do as it interacts with subdivisions, roadside ditches, underground drainage systems, that it's all going to be interacting with as it heads east toward the Beltway. So the subdivisions that will begin to see water as the flow increases, and right now we have about this much flow, and the flow will increase as the levels rise. Those subdivisions are Twin Lakes, which is right near the spillway, so they will be one of the first subdivisions to experience water, likely in the streets. Eldridge Park, Lakes on Eldridge North, Independence Farms, Tanner Heights, and the Heritage Business Park. And to kind of give you an idea of where I'm talking about, this is along and north of Tanner Road, slightly west of Eldridge Parkway, up to West Little York, and over to Beltway 8. That is the region where we will be seeing some inundation. The depths will vary, and some places may not see water, other places may see water. Some places may see street flooding, other places may see structure flooding.
Do you want those Eldridge? There's a bunch of people who live over Lakes of Eldridge and things. Should they leave?
Right now, what we are recommending people to do is pay attention to the water conditions today in those areas. This is not going to happen fast. This is a slow rise. So we are asking people to pay attention to the water elevations. Be prepared to leave, especially in the Twin Lakes and Eldridge Park subdivisions and the Lakes on Eldridge. That would be the Lakes on Eldridge south of Tanner Road. As the Corps was saying, we will be looking a lot at this today. We will have updated information. The latest forecast is actually for a reduction in the overall pool height of Addicks from 112 down to 110.5. So we are currently reviewing our list of subdivisions that will be flooding from the pool and seeing if there's any subdivisions that can be removed. Because we understand there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of fear, and if we do not think you're going to flood, we want to let you know that. On the opposite side of this, on Barker, there is expected to be a higher pool now at 104.4, and so we are reviewing the list of subdivisions in that reservoir to see if there's any that need to be added. The biggest challenge that we face right now is determining how the flow, as I said, interacts with our system and where the water will go as it comes out of the north end of the Addicks Reservoir. The best thoughts right now is that the flow will move along Tanner Road east toward Beltway 8 and then approach Brittmore and turn south down Brittmore all the way to I-10 and likely enter into Rummel Creek. And then from Rummel Creek, it will flow into Buffalo Bayou. There could be some extension of that, especially near around the peak, but that is the line of thinking right now. There is also some potential for some of this to spill over to the east side of the Beltway. This would be in a more isolated fashion. It would convey or pass through the intersections of the Beltway, the roadway intersections of the Beltway, and some of that water may end up into White Oak Bayou. So potentially not all of the peak will end up into Buffalo Bayou. Some portion of it may end up into White Oak Bayou. that's a helpful thing for Buffalo Bayou. And considering the conditions on White Oak Bayou now, it can easily handle any amounts of flow that would come to it. The other question has been, and we've done some work on this, is what are the structure flooding situations in the reservoirs from the pool? And at the current elevation of 108 feet, we are estimating 2,100 structures have water in them in attics from the pool. In Barker, at an elevation of around 100 to 101 feet, we are estimating anywhere from 350 to around 700 structures. We do need to make you aware that the Barker Reservoir monitoring gauge was flooded yesterday evening by the pool. It is no longer operational. We have contacted the USGS. They are unable to reach the site because of flooding in the northern part of the county. They're based out of Shenandoah. And what we are doing right now is we have a law enforcement personnel going to pick them up in a high water vehicle to take them to Barker and establish a temporary measuring gauge so we can once again be monitoring the pool of the reservoir. Based on the elevation of attics, we are concerned we may also lose the attics gauge. And so they are also going to establish a temporary recording site on attics so we make sure we continue to have accurate and reliable readings of both of these reservoirs. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Can you talk about, what about the San Jacinto River and Kingwood Falls?
The San Jacinto River right now on the West Fork is at record levels. This has approached and in some cases exceeded the record flood of 1994. Disastrous flooding is occurring on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. Water is likely into the second story of homes, if not over the rooftops along the river. This water is going into Lake Houston and then across the Lake Houston spillway, down the lower portion of the San Jacinto River to Galveston Bay. We do expect also to have record flooding on the East Fork of the San Jacinto River around FM 1485, and again, water may be into the second story of homes there. On the lower portion of the San Jacinto River, we do not expect it to reach levels of 1994. It may approach that, but at this time we think it will be just below it. There will still be very significant flooding in the Rio Villa, Banana Bend, Highlands, and portions of Sheldon area. It is also possible that portions of I-10 potentially could see water, if not overtopped, at the San Jacinto River. There's also a significant amount of pipelines and railroad tracks that cross the lower portion of the San Jacinto River. And given the amount of flow that is coming down the river, we saw in 1994 a significant amount of scouring and erosion of the river bottom during the flow. And so we will be monitoring very closely the pipeline structures. In 1994, there was a rupture of a pipeline and a fire on the river due to the scour. And so we are monitoring that very closely right now. One thing to mention is that the flooding on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River is a combination of all three of the following creeks: Cypress Creek, Spring Creek, and Lake Creek, all of which have produced record levels. The releases out of Lake Conroe are only a small portion of the actual water getting down to the West Fork. As a matter of fact, overnight, Lake Conroe has significantly reduced their releases in hopes to help alleviate some of the flow coming down the West Fork. There is also very significant record flooding on Cedar Bayou in the Baytown area. And portions of I-10 over in the eastern part of the county are being impacted at this time. Any other questions?
How about downstream Buffalo Bayou in the Memorial area? What do you expect in that area?
So Buffalo Bayou is continuing to drain its water at this time. This is the majority of the water is from the rainfall event that we had on Saturday and Sunday. The bayou is receding in the region of downtown Houston upstream to about 610, and then in the reach from 610 up to the dams, the bayou is holding steady. And the reason the bayou is holding steady is because it is obtaining inflows from Attucks and Barker as was discussed. What we will be looking at today closely is the modeling to determine what impact the uncontrolled flow around the spillway will have on Buffalo Bayou. And we will hopefully have those available for you for the midday news conference.
Do you guys have a thumbnail sketch at least of what that might look like for folks who live in Memorial, the Galleria, the Heights, Montrose, sort of that string of dense neighborhoods that stretches along I-10, along the axis of the city to downtown?
At this time, based on what we have seen and based on the magnitude of the uncontrolled flow, most of those areas will be fine. The majority of the impact, if any, will be in the reach around the Beltway 8 and I-10 area, and then downstream possibly to 610. But within the 610 loop, downstream to the Houston Ship Channel, the amount of impact may not be that great, but we are looking at that to see what, if anything.
With the Addicks Reservoir now at 108 feet, can you just explain, I guess, in the simplest terms, what this should be, what people should take from that?
So at 108 feet, the only thing that's important about 108 feet is that the water begins to overtop the spillway. The pool of the reservoir is still rising, so flooding is going to continue along the structures and the homes that are against the western edge of the pool. So streets are going to be flooding. They will continue to flood. New streets will continue to flood. New homes will continue to flood. And as the pool rises above 108 feet, the amount of water that is going over the spillway will be increasing. And those subdivisions we talked about along Tanner and Eldridge will be seeing increasing amounts of water. Initially street flooding and potentially structure flooding.
Some of those areas already seeing water in their home?
I don't think at this point we have water in homes from the overflow since it's just begun and we're talking about a very small amount. But I know there is some street flooding in at least a couple of those subdivisions near the reservoir. And we have to remember that a lot of our subdivisions drain with underground systems, so curb and gutter, and those curb and gutter systems go to the reservoir on a normal day to drain the water. So as the reservoir has filled up, it has pushed back up the underground pipes and come up through the underground system in the streets. And so that's how the streets are starting to flood.
Do you know how long this will last?
The overflow,
Yeah, I think our best indication was September 20th, I believe is what we said.
that's when the overflow will terminate on Addicks is September 20th, but like Mr. Russo mentioned earlier, it's not going to continue at a peak level for that entire time. And hopefully with dry weather and all that may come down a little bit. Now, as far as the structure flooding in the reservoirs goes, that is going to last for an extended period of time, and we're talking several weeks.
So for several weeks, they'll just the water will keep rising in those homes? Is that what that means?
No, for several weeks, the water will, I believe we're expecting the peak in the reservoir later this week, correct? Yeah. We're expecting the peak in the reservoir at the end of this week, but to get the water to recede and to get the water completely out of all the homes will take several weeks. So the lowest homes could be inundated with water up to a month.
Edmund, I know years and years ago, when they were initially building these developments out there, the Army Corps of Engineers fought tooth and nail to put a stop to it because they were concerned about the impacts the developments would have on reservoirs and on the dams. Has that exacerbated the situation that we're looking at now? The fact that all of what used to sort of capture water has now been paved over, and we have neighborhoods getting flooded instead of just having the ground there available to take the water?
Well, yeah, that's a natural phenomenon. I mean, if you're building in areas that are considered storage for the reservoir, that is an issue. So, correct.
What about the folks over in like Briar Forest area, Kirkwood? I think some of those homes are already underwater, or you anticipate it to rise? I hate to ask neighborhood by neighborhood, but that's kind of what we're getting at.
Right. I I understand, and I can completely understand the uncertainty that people are dealing with, both in the spillway region, in the reservoir region, and on Buffalo Bayou. This is a complex situation, and I know people want to know exact answers right now, and they want to know exactly what they need to do. My own house is in the spillway region of this reservoir, so I completely understand what you're going through. We will be looking very hard at the locations along Buffalo Bayou that we think we might see any impacts. Right now, we're not confident enough to say that there even will be any impacts. So that might be a little bit of good news here, that if the flow around the ends of the reservoir spreads out, if some of it manages to get over into White Oak Bayou, there may not be a significant impact on Buffalo Bayou, but we're just going to have to look at it.
Any idea when you might have those numbers?
We hope to have it for the midday. If not, it would be for the evening. And we're certainly going to be looking at how long does it even take the overflow to get to Buffalo Bayou. It might take several hours, if not half a day, to get there.
But I just want to back up there for a second, because you're talking about what would sound like the best case situation. There's a lot of water ends up in White Oak Bayou, which did flood earlier, but has since receded. It seems like you can take the water now. But earlier you were talking about, if the effects were to sort of happen, I think sort of the way that thumbnail sketch you provided, that a lot of the effects would be sort of along I-10-ish, sort of up to the loop. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people at the Beltway in 10, obviously, and you have the Galleria at 6, 10, and 10, and all the development, and all the towers and everything around there that flooded earlier. There are big flood waters coming back to those areas.
The elevation of Buffalo Bayou during the actual event itself was very high. It was well above the 500-year level. In the portion of what we're going to call the lower portion of the bayou, which was inside 610, which I'll lump the Galleria area into that, we will likely not see too much of a significant rise on that portion of the bayou. What we're looking at is rises in the portion from possibly upstream of 610 to near the Beltway. That is the region we're going to be focused on. But right now, because I want to try to give residents as much as we know, right now we are not seeing that. So even with the overflow taking place right now, we're not going to see an immediate rise on Buffalo Bayou, and there may not be much of a rise on the bayou.
So the people you want to leave today are like the Eldridge Parkway folks. Right? That's a huge development, the master plan community. Is that what you're like? Out of everything you said, those are the people that you know?
The residents that we're most concerned about right now are those subdivisions in the spillway zone. So that would be Eldridge Park, Lakes on Eldridge, Tanner Heights, Independence Farms, Heritage Business Park, and really on Lakes of Eldridge North, that's going to be the portion of the subdivision closest to Tanner. All of the residents in these subdivisions need to be aware of what is going on. They need to be prepared for rising water. The water may start coming up into your street. If you want to leave, now is the time to leave. The reason being is once the water comes into the street, you're not going to be able to leave. So that is why we have been talking about this for the last day and a half, to warn you, to warn the residents that this potential was there, to give you as much warning as we possibly could that this might happen. Of course, when we first started talking about it, we were uncertain if we would even get to these levels. Well, now we are at these levels, and we're very confident that we're going to get water in some of these subdivisions, initially in the streets, and then potentially in some of the homes.
Do you have any idea how many homes are covered by sort of that list that you provided just now?
The only way that we could accurately get a count of the number of homes in the spillway zone would be to know the slab elevation of each, and we do not have that. We have a little bit better estimations in Barker by using ground elevations, because we have studied this for a long time in Barker, that if this ever happened, what would flood. The engagement of the spillway is something, like I said, that while it's always been possible, we have not spent any time really studying it and to have the exact numbers of what may be impacted. And plus the the elevation differences from one house to another can be substantial just when the house is built.
So you guys are basically writing a book on what an attic's spillway situation looks like today as this unfolds.
You're exactly right. We have never faced this before. We have uncertainty in how the water is going to react as it moves out of the spillway and into the surrounding area. And I don't know of a lot of other places in the region that have experienced something exactly like this, where you have structures right up at the bottom of your spillway. So this is something that we are facing, and it's a complex scenario of incoming water into the reservoirs, outgoing water through the floodgates, and now water going out through one spillway of it. And we spent a lot of time on the attics spillway. The Corps mentioned that we also are going to have overtopping of the spillway on both ends of Barker, on the north end and on the south end. But this is expected to be a very small amount of water. And so we think at this time that all of that water will be contained in the 2 ditches that ring the reservoir. So we are at this time not expecting any significant structure flooding along the reservoir from Barker. This is a very small amount of water. Now, if the forecast changes for the pool elevation, then it is possible that those ditches would not be able to handle the flow over the spillway. So that's something we're also going to have to be looking at today, along with all of the other flooding that continues to happen over the area.
Any idea when we'll see that from Barker?
The spillway engagement, do you have a date for that?
Yeah, for Barker, we anticipate the spillway to start flowing on Friday, the 1st of September, and end on Monday, the 4th of September.
So compared to attics, that's a very small window and a very small amount of water.
And with the attics, the homes over there, do we have any idea how much water they should expect to see, as far as inches or feet, if they get it into their homes?
In the spillway or in the pool?
In the spillway.
That's difficult. The reason why that's difficult is because if we don't have the elevation of the homes in that area, it's hard to tell how much water they're getting into them. I have looked at some elevation maps, just looking at elevation maps and tried to determine that, just eyeballing it. And those 2 subdivisions that are right up next to the reservoir, Twin Lakes, and I believe it's Lakes on Eldridge, and Eldridge Park, they could have the most impact. So obviously the closer you are to the reservoir, the lower you are. The land slopes down toward the reservoir. So those are the lowest areas, and those homes would potentially be the first to be flooded, and as the pool rises, the water would rise deeper into the homes. The homes further away from the reservoir, so as you go towards West Little York, those homes would experience less flooding, if any flooding at all. There might just be street flooding in those areas up towards West Little York.
What about the homes in the pool?
So the homes in the pool, some of the lowest homes are around 103 feet, and we are currently at 108 feet. So some of the lowest homes, and these are in the Bear Creek Village subdivision, right now potentially have up to 4 to 5 feet of water in them. Anything else? All right, we will have another update on this situation, I believe, at 1:30. And we will plan also to have another update this evening at 7:30.